this video, I'm going to talk to you about the other types of sampling which fall under the category of non-random sampling. Now, non-random sampling is where every member does not have an equal chance of being selected, as opposed to random sampling where they did. There are two main methods of non-random sampling. The first is quota sampling. Now, a quota just means a fixed share. So quota sampling is where some kind of researcher or interviewer selects a sample that they think represents the population. So they do it like this. They'll divide the population into groups according to certain characteristics. So they might want to interview people of a certain age who believe certain things. So these groups might not be mutually exclusive. They might have some overlap here. People might fall into more than one of these groups. And what happens is this researcher interviews people and assesses them, and if they think they fit the characteristics of a certain group that they want, then they will allocate people to those groups until the quotas for those groups are met. So they might say, I want to have this many people that fit this characteristic, but this many people that fit that characteristic, so they'll just fill up those groups until those quotas are met. Now, quota sampling has some advantages and some disadvantages. One of the advantages is the fact that it means that a small sample could still be representative of the population. So let's make a note of that. Small samples representative of the population. Now I say could because it doesn't mean they're definitely representative of the population, but they could be. You don't need a sampling frame, which can be a benefit in terms of time and money costs. But then it's worth pointing out that as well as therefore being quick and easy and inexpensive, let's make a note. As well as that, it also enables us to make easy comparisons between different groups in a population. So easy to compare groups in a population. However, there are some disadvantages. Of course, the fact that it's non-random means that you are going to get some bias, and especially with the fact that there's vision into the groups depends on the interviewer and their own biases. The fact that you're dividing a population into groups can be costly. So the interview process can be costly in terms of time and money. If you decide to increase the scope of your study, if you decide to add more people in, make your sample bigger, you're going to add more time and more expense in a way that types of random sampling doesn't do. So any kind of increase to the study increases cost. And remember, when I say cost, I'm referring to both time and money. And also, you've got this idea of non-responses. If somebody doesn't fit a quota, you're completely ignoring their response. You're not taking them into account. So non-responses are not recorded, but they're ignored. And that feeds, of course, into the idea of bias in your survey. Bias in your sample. Now, the second type of non-random sampling is called opportunity sampling. And opportunity sampling is where you just select your sample from whoever is available at the time, anybody who fits your criteria at the time. It's also called convenience sampling. So you've probably all encountered a time when you've been walking down the street and somebody with a survey has been approaching people with their clipboard to ask them questions about something. This is an example of opportunity sampling. It has some advantages, of course. The advantages are that it's easy to carry out, and it's relatively inexpensive because it doesn't have all of the costs associated with identifying sampling frames and those kinds of things. But the disadvantage is quite big here. It's highly unlikely to provide a representative sample. And it's also highly dependent on the individual researcher. if you have a group of or a team of researchers in the street with clipboards wanting to ask a particular survey, and they only want to ask this survey to adults, they're obviously not going to speak to children. That's where we're talking about selecting people who fit your criteria. But also, you might find that researcher A doesn't like the look of somebody and therefore doesn't want to approach them, whereas person B would be happy to approach that person. So there's all sorts of bias coming in from the individual researchers there as well. And of course we know that any kind of bias means that the data you collect from your sample is less likely to be representative of the true population. Now you can have a go at exercise 1C.